So I have a friend and colleague from rabbinical school that most Fridays, she and I get onto Google Meet, not Zoom. We get onto Google Meet with one another most Friday mornings and discuss what it's like to be rabbis in similar sized pulpits and exploring what it might mean to lead these days. Sometimes we remember to get some text study in, but often she and I end up chevrutaing, being study partners on the very job of being rabbi today and living as youngish, I don't know if I'm young anymore, youngish Jewish women in this world. She lately has become a regular at her local pottery studio. It's been a place that she goes to just do something creative and let go for herself. Last week she told me that she attended a class on making shaped coffee mugs, meaning folks should make a mug, but that it should be shaped like something else, not a cylinder or not a simple cylinder mug, but shaped like something else. She said one of the other people taking the class said, "Ooh, I know, I'll make a pumpkin in honor of the next holiday." She meant Halloween. My friend was sharing this with me because at first she wanted to laugh and say, well, I'm Jewish. There are about 6 other holidays between now and Halloween. But maybe she'd join in and make an apple in honor of her next holiday. But my friend found that she hesitated. The pottery studio had become a place that she could go to care for her own mental health. Did she want to risk how comfortable she felt there by revealing that she was Jewish? Would she have to contend with accusations and questions that weren't actually about her anyway? She ended up saying so, but it stuck with her that she hesitated. It's a really hard time to be a Jew in America. For decades, we have enjoyed what we thought was a suppression of anti-Semitism. And that respite is over. When I began rabbinical school in 2014, I never imagined that I'd be giving a high holiday sermon about anti-Semitism. I certainly never thought I would be doing it more than once. And yet here I am for the 3rd year, still hoping I can give us the tools to face it. I admit that I think this will be perhaps somewhat of an unusual sermon for me. We're going to explore a bit about how we talk about anti-Semitism, what it is, and I hope how our own stories and storytelling might be able to begin the project of dismantling it. Because I think part of what makes it so hard is not only that anti-Semitism has again come into the forefront of our lives, it is also that we don't always know how to tell its story, which then means that our would-be allies, who do exist, I promise they do, but they don't always understand it because we don't always know how to tell them about it. And so that's the story, my theme of stories that I hope to explore today. What is the story of anti-Semitism? Not a full history. There are lots of good books that Rabbi Grossman and I can both recommend on the full history, but how does it impact our individual stories? How can we change that story and the story that we tell about it so that we might see its dismantling, God willing, someday very soon? In a recent conversation at the Aspen Jewish congregation that was recorded and shared through the Chutzpah podcast, Dara Horn participated in a panel entitled, "Can We Tell a New Jewish Story?" She spoke about Judaism as an ancient anti-tyrannical movement. When the ancient Jews said that they would not bow to false gods or idols, they didn't actually just mean statues, like our midrash about Abraham and his father's idol shop. They actually also meant the tyrannical dictators who situated themselves as kings and gods amongst men. Anti-tyrannical movements and anti-hierarchical movements tend to anger tyrants. And so our survival is also fundamentally intertwined with anti-Semitism. Dara Horn says that anti-Semitism is not just a social prejudice. Nor is it just a conspiracy theory. It is a lie that is told by people in power in order to maintain their power. It is an enduring and consistent lie over thousands of years. And the lie, she says, is simply this: Jews are the obstacle to whatever you value most. Author Sarah Hurwitz says that the lie boils down to three things: power, depravity, and conspiracy. We have outside power, we are depraved, which is to say evil, and we conspire against the rest of society. With these three pillars of the lie, we are inherently untrustworthy. We can, of course, make it look like we're just a small community trying to practice our own tradition. The anti-Semite would say that's part of our conspiracy to do so. Dara Horn describes two major modes of anti-Semitism, which she terms Purim anti-Semitism, which calls for our total annihilation or elimination, as we see in the Purim story. That one is fairly easy to spot. The other she terms Hanukkah anti-Semitism, whereby we're told to assimilate, or how to just be cool, fit in a little better. It requires not dead Jews, she says, but cool Jews, those willing to give up whatever specific aspect of Judaism, of Jewish civilization, is the current uncool. She further says it doesn't involve intolerance or persecution, at least not at first. Instead, it looks like the Jews themselves rejecting their own traditions, a form of weaponized shame. I'll say more about this on Kol Nidre, but I do think this is heavily impacting and plaguing liberal Jews today. Our own self-determination in the Middle East, actual Zionism, is really uncool. And so maybe our love of Israel needs to be not really Zionist. And I'll speak more there on Kol Nidre. But that mode, this Hanukkah anti-Semitism, that has us trying to point to the health benefits of circumcision or calling our Passover diet weird but who we are. It's what led to generations pulling away from Judaism, such that it may not have gotten passed down as robustly as it could have to many American Jews, many Jews of Eastern European descent. But the problem with this internalized shame that comes out in our own apologies for our tradition is that the assimilation is always conditional. So we look at history, Hanukkah anti-Semitism can and has throughout history eventually turned into Purim anti-Semitism. So we have to be proud of our tradition. We have to stand up for it. We cannot apologize for it. We should not enter into apologetics or point to our people's accomplishments as deserving of societal respect. To paraphrase Dara Horn again in that interview, she said, we shouldn't need to have had a Jew cure polio to not be at the top of the FBI's hate crime list. We shouldn't have to say that. And yet, it was a Jew who started the path toward curing polio, and we are at the top of the FBI's list of religiously motivated hate crimes and hate incidents. Yes, it does. So don't apologize for who we are in hopes of combating anti-Semitism. Don't point to good Jewish accomplishments in hopes of combating anti-Semitism. Instead, simply be proud of who we are and what we have accomplished despite anti-Semitism. So beyond just, okay, being proud of our own Judaism, how do we face it and address it? I think this is where I want to offer tools. There are two main ways that we can do this. One is by thinking carefully and choosing intentionally the metaphors and language that we use when we talk about anti-Semitism. And two, by sharing how it impacted us, whether personally or whether personal experience or in the family history that has led to who we each are. So, what is the story of what it is? For Dara Horn, it is the lie that we are the enemy of what society values most. The lie is pliable because what society values most is pliable. There are three metaphors that I've seen frequently used to describe anti-Semitism's acting in history and how it comes and goes: water, viruses, and machines. By water, I mean using language that describes anti-Semitism as coming in waves, or saying that it ebbs and flows. We use water metaphors when we say that we need to push back against the rising tide of anti-Semitism. I know it can feel like that, and I know when we look at the graphs of history, it looks like a wave. But I want to problematize using that metaphor too much. Because water is a part of nature, a natural and frankly necessary phenomenon. Waves and tides are part of the world that will happen with or without human influence, and to use this story denies a certain level of human responsibility. Anti-Semitism need not be a part of nature. No system of oppression is a part of nature. It is a human occurrence, and it is a human problem that humans must take responsibility to solve. If we use language that suggests that it's natural, we make it harder to end. This helps us to evade human responsibility or makes it an individual responsibility to move away from it rather than a societal responsibility. Another extremely common metaphor is that of a virus. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory, the former chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, is often has one of the most turned to and simplest definitions of anti-Semitism. It can be quite valuable, and his metaphor also because his metaphor gets to its adaptability. Anti-Semitism, he says, means denying the right of Jews to exist collectively as Jews with the same rights as everyone else. It takes different forms in different ages. In the Middle Ages, Jews were hated because of their religion. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, they were hated because of their race. Today, they are hated because of their nation state, the State of Israel. It takes different forms, but it remains the same thing, the view that Jews have no right to exist as free and equal human beings. And so he says the best way to understand anti-Semitism is to see it as a virus. Viruses attack the human body, but the body itself has an immensely sophisticated defense, the human immune system. How then do viruses survive and flourish? By mutating. And like a virus, anti-Semitism mutates, and in doing so defeats the immune system set up by cultures to protect themselves against hatred. There have been 3 such mutations in the past 2,000 years. We are living through a 4th. For Rabbi Sacks, the metaphor of a virus is helpful because it highlights how adaptable anti-Semitism can be as it can and does mutate. Unlike other forms of oppression, anti-Semitism is less about keeping Jews downtrodden, which is most often a function of racism, and more about maintaining the lie that Jews are the reason that society isn't functioning as it should. As society evolves, so does anti-Semitism. I know that the viral metaphor can be extremely helpful for many, as it does get to the root of that adaptability and mutation. I find that it is very useful for understanding how the lie Dara Horn referred to also mutates and evolves as those who are in power change and evolve. But I do want us to remember a little bit something about that metaphor and think about it when we use it. Because we also hear in it some ways in which we've talked about anti-Semitism in recent years, the story of our current experiences. We use the virus metaphor when we say it is surging or spreading the way that illnesses do. Someone might be called a virulent anti-Semite who is infecting others around them. But using a metaphor that is meant to help us understand the concept to tell the story of today's experience is, I believe, somewhat risky. Because if anti-Semitism is a virus, we're perpetually left seeking a new vaccine, knowing that the vaccine will eventually need a new formula as the virus adapts yet again. Like COVID, anti-Semitism is something that becomes, once here to stay, even if its impact is variable, sometimes deadly, sometimes a sneeze. It has become something that has claimed the lives of millions and sometimes doesn't touch other lives as heavily. But using this metaphor in the way that we talk about anti-Semitism in this world, too, suggests that perhaps it's at least somewhat natural. A part of nature that we can and do seek to eliminate, unlike the flow of water, but natural nonetheless, still has some level of evading human responsibility because it makes it an individual responsibility to get vaccinated rather than a societal responsibility. But if it is a helpful metaphor for you, I still accept it, if you will help to inoculate your non-Jewish friends. In a guide created recently by the organization Bend the Arc Jewish Action, Sharon Rose Goldsvik suggests that perhaps the most useful metaphor when talking about anti-Semitism and that most acknowledges human power and responsibility, is more in line with how we speak about machinery or technology. For example, anti-Semitism is part of the machinery of division and fear, created and used for specific material or political gain. That lie that Dara Horn mentioned, that's a tool that is used by political powers to keep themselves in power. They operate the lie to suggest that it is Jews who create the problems of society. They push play on the program to suggest that we are the cause of societal ills. So instead of telling a viral story that someone spreads anti-Semitism, instead refer to them perhaps as fueling it, contributing to its operational purpose of sowing division and fear into our communities. When we tell the story of anti-Semitism as a machine, we better frame our minds to think of it not as something natural that ebbs and flows, or that has occasional outbreaks. Instead, it becomes something that we can figure out the way collectively to dismantle, even if it will take time and effort and allies to do so. And so I think one of the best tools to the work of dismantling anti-Semitism is our own individual stories of it. When we share our individual stories of how anti-Semitism has impacted our lives and our families' histories, we move away from the apologetics that Dara Horn described and make ourselves more whole and more human in the eyes of those to whom we speak. Which is to say, when you talk to someone who is not Jewish about anti-Semitism, tell them who you are and how it has contributed to making you and who you are outside of it. Back toward the end of October last year, the Jewish Federation of Howard County brought in a training program for Jewish leaders in the county to learn from, which was called a Project Shema, which works to help prepare people to understand anti-Semitism. I also must acknowledge and thank the Federation that they also ran the same session for primarily non-Jewish leaders of the Howard County public school system, in addition to the one run separately for Jewish leaders of various organizations and synagogues. Rabbi Grossman and myself were both blessed to be invited to participate. They laid out the 4 basic problems that need to be solved in order to dismantle the machine of anti-Semitism. One of the problems is that people don't really know who Jews are. Dara Horn describes growing up in Texas, going to a Holocaust museum on a field trip with her classmates, and having a classmate say, "So are there any Jews left?" People don't always know or remember that we're here, let alone who we are. And therefore, people don't really know what anti-Semitism is. People don't really know how it works, and Jewish perspectives are therefore often less trusted. The key way to address all of these is to tell your story to a willing listener and a would-be ally. It is important to know and to find the person who is a would-be ally first. Humanize Jews and our concerns through your own story. Be willing to clarify and verify any questions or biases they might have. Because my focus of sermons this year is on story, I want to focus on that first step, sharing the story of anti-Semitism in a way that humanizes rather than accuses. Remember that most Jews don't understand. Most non-Jews do not understand. Some Jews don't either. It's a very complicated concept. Most non-Jews do not understand Jewish peoplehood. They know very little of our customs and are given very little information about our history. The rare times we show up in public school history books, it is rarely ever about our tradition and very often about our destruction. They may not know the number of times our people have been expelled throughout history or how many times we've been attacked for being who we are. So tell them, but not in an academic way. Do not sit there with a history book and list off the number of times that Jews were expelled from various countries throughout Europe. but tell them in a way that helps to get to know you. We'll give you my story as an example, with the humility of my parents sitting in the room. I have a pretty vivid memory of a purple egg on our Seder plate when I was in 3rd or 4th grade. This was because I was born into what was initially a fairly secular interfaith family. And so my sister and I often dyed eggs sometime in the spring with my dad. That year, as a family, we'd only just begun the journey of reclaiming Jewish identity and Jewish practice. I'd been in Hebrew school for a year or so, and my sister was in the preschool at the synagogue. The Haggadah we were using was the one that she'd created in her preschool classroom, because none of us had the tools for much more at that point. We were, as a family, learning our own tradition from scratch because of the oppression and the Hanukkah anti-Semitism that previous generations of my mother's family had suffered as Jews. Her great-grandparents immigrated to the United States in the early 20th century in hopes of escaping pogroms and oppression in Eastern Europe. Like many other Jews of their era, my great-grandparents and my grandparents found that, at least in the US, what felt like the safest strategy to combat, or at least avoid being a victim of anti-Semitism, was assimilation, to become the one who fit in, to be the cool Jew. And so my mom and her siblings were raised with a message of, you're Jewish, but don't tell anyone about it. Because of our fair skin, my family was able to assimilate and in many ways benefit from whiteness, but at the cost of our own knowledge of our tradition, and always, as we see now, conditionally. This meant, though, that by the time my sister and I came along, my family of 4 had to, and I will say quite successfully, rebuild our connection to Judaism. I do not resent for a moment my grandparents' and great-grandparents' decisions. They were among the people who came to the United States to flee persecution and could see that anti-Semitism and assimilation into whiteness was a helpful means of seeking safety from the repetition of the traumas they'd experienced, and they became a part of a larger culture of being a man or a woman in the street and a Jew only at home. In this story, I tried to convey 2 things. Though my family is fair-skinned, our whiteness is conditional, and often granted when it is a helpful tool in the cog of oppression and division. We see that played out on the world stage today as Jews are described as colonizers in the Middle East. Colonization of other lands is a thing of European history, often white people, but not Jewish history. I also hope to convey to anyone listening to that story that anti-Semitism directly impacted the ability of my family to receive and transmit its own culture. It wasn't only the violent moments that makes the news. Anti-Semitism in the ways that is in the ways that we ourselves don't always get to know who we are, even when we're still used as tools to sow division. My family, like many American Jews of Ashkenazi descent, were victims of Hanukkah anti-Semitism. I suspect many in this room feel this too. I'd like to share, I have indeed framed my family's history and personal history in this way to a few receptive non-Jews since that training the Federation put together last fall. And it has worked. It has been impactful. At least one person told me she'd never thought of it like that. But as the grandchild of Italian immigrants, she identified with having ancestors choose assimilation to escape oppression at the cost of future generations' cultural literacy. That was a true moment of human connection to me. I'd shared with her the story of my Jewish side. I'd completely forgotten my Italian grandfather's Catholic family went through something similar. Suddenly, this other person and I could ask one another about what we've been able to regain and relearn about our respective cultures. Suddenly, we were just 2 human beings with a shared experience, ready to rejoice in our similarities and explore the possibilities that came from our differences, ready to move forward to build a just and loving society. And so I do think this is our best tool to at least start unscrewing and dismantling the machine of anti-Semitism, our best inoculation against our friends being infected by it, sharing of ourselves and sharing how it has impacted us. not listing off other Jews' accomplishments in hopes of earning enough points to be permitted to exist. Be proud of what we as a people have done and share your own story so you can find a human connection. If you're looking for ways to rebuild your own connection, I'm always here. If we do not share our own stories, others will end up telling them for us, and their stories, from a place of misunderstanding or from a place of malice, may continue to fuel the machine of anti-Semitism. To return to Rabbi Sachs, he once said, "To be a Jew, from the days of Abraham and Sarah to today, is to carry the burden and the dignity of difference. That difference is worth celebrating and worth sharing. Share the story of how you are Jewish. Share the story of what it means to you. Share the story of how anti-Semitism has impacted your personal life and your family's life. Share the story of how it changes and how its technology is updated in order to separate us from others and all of society from one another. And this year, may we refuse to let our uniqueness be someone else's tool for division. May we be willing to share of who we are, even if it is just when making an apple-shaped mug in honor of our next holiday. May we see a world in which we don't even need to hesitate to do so. Shana Tova.